just realize boundaries are for safeguarding, right? For protection, not for keeping people out. A lot of times, I think we confuse the two and use boundaries as an excuse to keep people away from our life.
Hello and welcome to the Overflow Podcast. This is a podcast on a mission to discover how you and I can live a life of abundance, full to overflowing. In Season 5, we're learning how to cultivate thriving relationships and how, through the good times and the bad, we can maintain the overflow. This is episode 41. My name is Carl Lindsay and I'm joined by my friend and co-host Philip Milosavljevic. How's it going, Philip?
Hey, Carl. How you doing, man?
Doing good. I wanna ask you a question.
Okay.
I want to start off
You
with
ask me so many questions, Carl.
Well,
what in the world?
next week you can ask me one.
All right, fine.
I want to start off with a dose of wisdom from Solomon. I want to hear what you think of this text.
Okay.
This is Proverbs 25:28.
Okay.
A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls.
Oh, gosh. I'm like immediately convicted. When Paul writes to Timothy, his protege, and he's like, listen, all scripture is profitable for rebuke, for correction, for like the building up of the believer. I'm like, I believe it 100%. So when I hear that, I'm just like, that's my life a little bit.
Right.
In a couple ways in terms of my health, like I have some goals that I want to reach, and I just am struggling with self-control, particularly with sugar, But the notion of the walls going down, for me, that means you have no boundaries.
Yeah.
Right? There's no marker to dictate, hey, this is my territory and this is your territory. No. The city
Gets ravaged.
It extends into the fields and it goes beyond, and it really will get destroyed.
Whether they're enemies or friends, they come in and they take what is yours.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some good wisdom there, right?
Yeah, I believe it. And if you have a wall, don't imagine that something won't dig underneath your wall.
Oh.
Yeah, isn't that how Babylon was taken? They
Right.
dug underneath the wall.
Through the river gate there.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So we are here talking about boundaries today. We're all about helping you navigate your relationships in a healthy way this season. And so we want you to have that happily ever after that seems so distant. And because we know that that's the type of relationship that God is desiring for us. So whether you're single, dating, engaged, married, we really hope these conversations are helpful. Please, again, share these episodes with your friends. Leave us a review or rating on your podcast app. And yes, send us a message on Instagram because we'd love to hear from you at Choose to Overflow. Just find us there or even choosetooverflow.com. We'd love to hear from you. Philip, who are we talking to today?
Hey, so today, you guys in the listening world, you are going to be incredibly blessed. Today we have Laia and Amaya together. Now, before, if it was just a month ago, I wouldn't be able to say that in one sentence. I'd have to pause and say and put a different last name with Laia. They just got married, so we're talking to a newlywed couple.
Congratulations.
Yes. And Joe, now you have been both kind of studying a pastoral route. You've also been in business and marketing and photography and videography. I mean, you're truly like a jack of all trades kind of a guy. You've had your own businesses, so you've been in so many ways, like just doing all kinds of stuff. And now you are working at the Loma University Church in the media department, in videography and film and that kind of stuff. So
yes,
is that kind of?
Yes, I think, I don't know, going into seeing God as a creative, I think just to keep that short, I got to know God, my God, as a creative, and learn to embrace that the term imago Dei, right? We're in his image. Learn to see God as a creative God. And if he made me like him, then I'm also creative. And if I can do creative things, I think that's one of the most spiritual things I can do, right? And if I can
I love that.
use that and embrace that and lean into it and carry that into career, if we want to call it that, and also do ministry with it. Yeah, that to me is
awesome.
everything, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
He's broken all the human rules that I've learned in my life.
No. And then obviously,
And now, Laia, so you are finishing your master's degree.
Yeah, I finished.
she's
You
done.
just finished.
Yeah, I
She's
just
done.
finished.
Another
Okay.
congrats.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow. Now,
Yeah.
you were at Andrews University, a small private Christian university in Michigan.
Yeah.
You came to Loma Linda University.
I came here during the pandemic, but I still finished at Andrews University
okay.
online.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And you were doing a master's in
Social
work. That's
Yes.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
So now this is quite the field. Particularly, I mean, I think of in Southern California, we have so many opportunities for social work. But
Yeah.
So now you're
Yeah.
also a creative. You're a musician. You're a singer. You're a worship
Super.
leader. I mean,
Yeah.
you're an incredibly gifted and talented human being. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I remember the first time I heard a music video with you in it. I was like, "Whoa, this girl! I cannot believe."
She's got pipes.
Yeah. She does.
Power, dude. Yeah.
So, but the two of you are also really passionate about relationships. You're really passionate about talking about just
Yeah.
young adulthood and the journey of just how do we do this thing called young adulthood well.
Yeah.
And so today we're going to be talking about the issues of boundaries. So I'm really excited about this conversation with the two
Yeah.
of you in
Too.
particular.
Me too. Yeah. Excited.
So boundaries, the first thing that most people probably go to is the no sex before marriage. That's the thing that gets talked about most in the church.
Yeah.
But there's more than that. There's more than that to boundaries. And so we want to talk to you guys about the other types. And yeah, I guess let's just start with there. What are the other types of boundaries? And we can get back into the sex one too, because that's obviously important as well.
Why
So-
did you look at me when you said we can talk about the sex one?
I didn't, did I?
You looked over at me, and then we'll talk about that one.
If
Philip.
anybody knows you, that would be pretty obvious.
Yeah. I think also boundaries don't just apply to romantic relationships.
True, yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that's something that I learned in therapy. But yeah, and something that my family struggled to understand at first, and now we, use the term boundaries all the time.
Well, also culturally, it's like boundaries.
yeah.
Don't you dare.
Right.
Yeah, I'm Hispanic, so if you know the Hispanic culture, we're very close, very in each other's business all the time, and a part of that, you kind of feel like setting boundaries is countercultural and even offensive to your family members. So, but there are 5 different kinds of boundaries that are 5 or 6 depending on where you read. But the ones that I learned are emotional, material, time/energy, mental, and physical.
Okay.
So do you want me to just recap really
Yeah.
quick?
Yeah, let's go through
Okay.
and maybe give an explanation on each of those.
Perfect. So emotional, when somebody, for example, a friend of yours comes to you and says, hey, I really need to talk about this thing that happened, right? And it's really emotionally charging. And so they start downloading everything that happened, and you start feeling a little bit overwhelmed. Well, if that happens enough times with maybe the same person or just in general, then that's a boundary that you need to create and say, hey, you know what? I had a rough day today. I can't emotionally handle your emotions right now. And I know that if I listen to this right now, I'm not going to be able to handle it. Can you just understand that, or maybe set some boundaries in that way? So then you have material boundaries. And the first one that comes to mind is, when you're in college, and I don't know if you guys do this, but girls borrow each other's clothes.
Don't
and,
touch my things.
know.
My name is on it. Don't touch it.
Well, so you probably did write your name on your clothes, didn't you?
I had to
could
write my
see
name
you
on my-
doing that.
When I was doing laundry, dude, we had to write our name on our clothes. Right? Don't touch my clothes. Right?
Yeah. But girls sometimes do it without asking each
Yeah.
other. But even obviously that's a boundary, but just material things. Like I personally never really felt comfortable with people borrowing my clothes, because it never came back in the same condition.
Right.
But I had friends that had a list of people and said like, hey, just write your name and the item that you're going to borrow.
Okay.
And then whenever you bring it back, then I'll just cross it off the list.
It's like a library.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness.
And so the boundaries were different for material boundaries in that situation with me and then somebody else. So that's material boundaries. Then you have time/energy. And say you work a job. I have a lot of friends who are nurses that experience this, where they are scheduled to work until 8 p.m. and then something happens, which happens often, and they need the extra help, and you have to stay suddenly 3 hours extra to overtime, right?
That's rough.
And so that's a time boundary that you need to set with work, even though it's really hard and it's paid time extra. So
there's an incentive to stay.
Right. So part of you is like, okay, well, I could use the extra money, right? But a lot of times it's actually abuse of time, abuse of your time. So those are time or energy boundaries that you just need to be sure to set with people. And then mental and physical are the last two. So mental boundaries are, again, similar to emotional in the sense of when you're having a conversation with someone, for example, if it's somebody who comes to you regularly because you're a very open person, and this happens to me a lot, where people assume that I will be therapy mode and never get tired of being in therapist mode. And so for me, it's a mental exhaustion that I have from being in that kind of role with people. So sometimes I have to just actually say verbally, hey, I'm off work. So listen, if you want to talk to me, I'm here as a friend. Just know I'm not here as your therapist. If you need a therapist, that's awesome. Let me help you out with that. But also understanding that not every conversation is positive or healthy to have with everybody.
Before you go on to physical, the mental one sounds very similar to emotional. Is that because your line of work is similar to the emotional side, or like what's another example for mental?
Yeah. So another, so I have here thoughts, values, opinions, and beliefs.
Okay.
So sometimes it could be, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I wonder because, I'm a fan of what you do. Obviously, you made it look so awesome, or it's so interesting. And so I like would sometimes do research when you were studying, right?
Yeah.
Just to be like, okay, I got to understand some of it. But I think that one, on another thing that I saw, they also have intellectual boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Does that kind of go into that one?
Yeah.
And I feel like at least that I understand. I was like, okay, mental or intellectual boundaries, right?
And again, emotions is your emotions, right? How you're feeling.
Right.
Whether you're drained or not.
Right. Mental can sometimes just be like, for example, your opinions, right? Sometimes having a conversation with someone that has different opinions than you can be a really stressful situation, right? And not that that's a bad thing. I think it's great to kind of push yourself and
have that dialogue as long as it's healthy.
Exactly.
Well, you even said it, like, for instance, there might be times where people are all constantly coming to you seeking advice on, or like not even directly. It's just like, what do you think? What is your advice? And obviously being human, you're not going to be 100% every single day or every time they come to you, right? And then it's like, what if you don't give them that 100% advice, that amazing, like, inspirational thing that you do give? It's like, all right, well, that didn't really work for me.
I think of sometimes when we talk about boundaries, I think defining that, the realization is boundaries are your safeguard against the world.
Yes.
In essence, in order for you to be healthy, whole, and continuing to be productive in your life. So boundaries, yes, they are quote unquote imposed on people to some degree, but they're for you. So I mean, the whole idea of, for instance, having emotional, mental, physical, time, energy boundaries, these are all in order to safeguard you and into being your best self every day. And if you don't uphold those, you will not only be your best self. That city will
be ravaged.
You will be, as exactly as Solomon's kind of example came about.
And
That was awesome.
just realize boundaries, what you said, are for safeguarding, right? For protection, not for keeping people out.
Yeah.
A lot of times I think we confuse the two and use boundaries as an excuse to keep people away from our life or really struggle internally with things that we should be going out
talking
and
about.
talking to people about. So I don't want to confuse the two. So let's just go into the last one. So there are 5 to 6, right? Because we have physical and sexual.
Okay,
So physical and sexual could sometimes be understood as similarly to mental and emotional, right? It's a little bit similar but different. Sexual boundaries obviously has to do with your body, right? What you feel comfortable doing, what and a lot of times in romantic relationships and dating relationships, how far you go with another person. Those kinds of boundaries are the ones that we talk about with sexual boundaries.
Right.
And then physical boundaries could simply be close proximity.
Yeah.
Do you like I don't know if everybody enjoys this, but I definitely am the type of person that likes to be close. And there are people that don't like to have you all up on them when you're sitting down and there's a big couch and you're squeezed right next to them. That's really, a physical boundary that some people have. And you need to be respectful of that boundary.
And then there's the platonic relationships at work, maybe, where people would rather handshake than hug, or by friends, etc. Right? So some people don't even like a hand on the shoulder. Yeah. So you got to be careful with that.
There's cultural boundaries too with physical. For example, there are some cultures where men and women do not have any kind of physical contact. And I had a situation where I reached out to shake someone's hand multiple times, not realizing that he was saying, no, I don't. Yeah, I don't shake hands with women. And to me, that was, the feminist in me was like, what is that about?
Who do you think you are?
Yeah. But then obviously later on understanding kind of explained it to me a little bit, but I read between the lines like, okay, I see it's a cultural / spiritual thing. But yeah, and physical, I think we talked about unwanted sexual / physical comments even, which is a big one in the workplace, like you said, where, you make advancements towards somebody else and it's unsolicited and unwanted. And that could be seen as a breach on somebody's physical boundary.
Yeah. Let's jump into your own experience as a couple in the dating phase and then now married. So talk to us about how you guys set boundaries in those categories and which ones were the hardest?
Ooh. Do you want to start?
You get it started and I'll jump in.
I would say Joe set our physical and sexual boundaries for us.
What a guy. What a guy.
Which I did not respect at first.
Yeah.
Not that I pushed him. Well, maybe. No, maybe I tried.
I don't think it was necessarily the push. It was more so we're both our cultural background is very like huggy, touchy, let's kiss each other, right? And so but I mean, I guess I was born in America, so I was born and raised American. So I kind of seen
the
that.
Mix.
Yeah, I get the mix out. But I also lived in Puerto Rico, where that Latin culture, like kiss, hey, how you doing, from across the street. Everybody's just very family oriented. You're close, you touch everything. Yeah.
But even
and so I understood.
I'm talking about even with kissing, for example. Like, okay, we set these boundaries, right? We're not going to go further than this. We're not going to have sex, which is another thing we can talk about. Sex isn't just sex, but beyond that, kissing seems like a pretty stable place to, kind of compromise. But even then, to a certain point, before we got married, we just stopped kissing. I mean, we kissed, but we didn't make out. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because there was just a lot of sexual tension building, and even just dating, it was something that we had to be really careful with. Yeah. And not to scare anybody, but it's just a matter of, I don't know, having a conversation with your partner and seeing like, hey, this is what happens internally for me, when this, I'm not trying to reject you. This isn't about you, but this is something that I need to do for me.
Yeah. Well, I think we can like, it's very easy to say, yeah, I was tempted. I was this and that. And kind of deject it from yourself.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, for me, for instance, my past relationships, I realized, I came to a point where I realized it wasn't that I was being tempted. I was leading myself into that. I was allowing myself to go into that, into that sphere of something that I should have held off for otherwise, right?
Yeah.
And so when it came to Laia, it was more so, and it may or may not sound cheesy, but really it was more so. I was very convicted earlier before I even met Laia. But I never really was strong enough mentally, physically, whatever we want to call it, to actually carry it through. And then so before I was a Laia, being single, I was like, I'm going to take my time to really get to know myself, who I really am. And that sounds kind of cliche, but really when I got to know myself, I knew what I'm capable of and what I should probably hold off or what I can work on.
Yeah.
And so I think that really helped me prior to starting a relationship, any type of relationship, but really a little bit farther than just friends with Laia. And early on, I was convicted, hey, like it was more so, I gotta say this though. I cannot even think about dating you if I'm not gonna marry you. Now, what comes with that is that I'm so convicted that I can't even touch you. I just have to put that out there. And that for me is really hard. And for a guy, right? It's kind of hard to open up and be,
We got a book from our good friends, Zach and Carissa.
Yeah.
Which was on sex. And this was right before we got married. They gave us this book, like maybe 5 or 6 months before. Yeah. And I started reading it. And I would tell Joe about it. And first of all, he, just from listening to me tell him about it, he was like, I can't listen to that. And
it was kind of like explicit. I was just like, okay.
It was very explicit. And it was great. It had the psychology, the medical terminology for everything. But
that gets your mind going.
It does.
Yeah, well, it's also like, when you, for instance, I have friends who watch a lot of like scary movies. I'm not into that stuff, but they're like, it almost like they're desensitized to that stuff, right? If I watch a scary movie now, it's been so long that I'm like, oh, dude, I get creeped out super fast.
Right.
Totally.
So like when you stay away from something, even then it's just like, oh gosh, like I'd rather not,
Yeah. And I'm sure that even with sexual boundaries, so now look at your own life and think, okay, have I struggled with, for example, pornography? Your boundaries are going to be different. And you're not even maybe going to realize a lot of the things that you're allowing yourself to feel or do because it's just natural to you.
Yeah.
And I know that for me, I've actually never really talked about this in public, but just my first kiss even was not really something that I wanted to happen, and it just kind of happened. And so sometimes your introduction to sex and sexual things is kind of early on, and you don't really know what to do with it, and then eventually you kind of just assume that
that's what it is.
Or you tell yourself, well, you know what, I've already passed that boundary, so that will be where I cut it off from now on. And then I pass it again. Well, then I'll cut it off here because I've gone that far.
We want to get to there. How about the other ones? Like, did you guys set emotional boundaries? Did you guys set time boundaries?
Yeah. So when we started dating, I was actually setting boundaries with my family right during that time. For, I think, time boundaries and emotional boundaries. And Joe was actually an emotional support for me in many ways, very specific ways. I didn't share everything with him. So we started off our relationship kind of setting him knowing I was setting those boundaries with my family. And was that the first time you learned about boundaries?
I think, I guess how should I say it? Educationally, I guess, coming from you. Yes, I learned a lot. And actually, when it comes to, for instance, emotional boundaries, I didn't even, so kind of yes and no. I guess we kind of naturally know about it, but when you put it into terms like that, and I started getting to know you and the therapy background, I started researching it myself because I get really curious. And so it all started to make sense. And also I learned a lot from you how to be vocal about my emotions. You really did teach me that. And I think in that I was able to start to set that emotional boundary in the sense of like, it's okay. Like for myself, even it's okay to actually talk about my emotions because obviously like naturally a lot of males are kind of held back, hold back from that.
Yeah.
I definitely did, my father and it's not like a typical thing, but my father he's a very loving person, but rarely did he say, I love you or I'm here for you. His love language is more like quality time. So he showed me he loved me with that stuff, but I never really heard it. So from that quietness, I kind of unconsciously learned like, I hold it in, that was just like my stance.
Right.
So,
as you were developing that relationship, was boundaries something you just kind of set the boundary early on, or was it something you kind of talk about as the need arises?
Right, I love this question.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. I think a little bit of both, right?
Yeah. But I will say I have friends who have set the boundaries in the beginning, and it's so beautiful to watch that happen because even before you get into like two of my friends just recently started dating, and they didn't want to kiss until they had the boundaries conversation, and I thought that was really sweet.
Right.
That's awesome.
And they talked about it, and obviously they both were aligned in the same thought, but just having that conversation released so much pressure, and it's like, okay, like we know what to expect now from this other person, and we have realistic expectations of the boundaries that we're keeping.
Yeah, absolutely.
And boundaries are really, they require intentionality.
Yeah.
It doesn't just happen,
Yeah.
Right, but I think on some degree you end up, maybe you're not thinking about setting time boundaries early on, and so all of a sudden you realize, hold on a second, my time is getting fully invested and I need to back off.
That's true.
Yeah.
So did those kind of things ever happen as well?
Honestly, for instance, like a time boundary, I think that started coming on later on, right, for me, because I was also in school. We were both in school, but I was also working a lot. And so I found myself investing a lot of time, obviously, in this relationship that I was very interested in. But then I found myself kind of stretching myself a little thin in the other things that I was doing. So that's when I was like, not that Laia was the last thing to come in my life, but I was like, I have to stay, be responsible with these things. And I'm not trying to leave you for last. But I think if we do set this boundary, although it's later on, because setting boundaries later on is kind of hurtful and it kind of sucks, right? But obviously with Laia and obviously the way that we talk about it, it was better to do it then, than not do it at all.
Oh, yeah.
Are you single with nowhere to mingle? If you've been enjoying our conversations on relationships this season and you're ready to pursue your own healthy and overflowing relationship, I want to introduce you to my friends at thelovepotluck.com. They run virtual speed dating for Seventh-day Adventist singles, and they're an Adventist dating platform that lets you have live face-to-face conversations with real people who share your values. You'll get to meet several individuals who are in your age range for less than what you'd pay for just one usual date. And their hosts take the awkwardness out of it, so you're sure to have a fun time. You can learn more or register at thelovepotluck.com. And for what it's worth, when I was helping my friends set this all up, it's actually where I met my girlfriend for the first time. So you never know who you might meet. Because let's face it, you're more likely to meet someone when you actually meet more people. So go ahead, sign up for their next event at thelovepotluck.com. So you just mentioned the idea of boundaries can be hurtful.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how to have that conversation that is as least hurt. What am I trying to say?
To understanding, right?
Yeah.
Like to be not hurtful as much as possible. Like,
Yeah.
what are some ways that we can kind of have those conversations?
Ooh, that's something I still struggle with. Laia is amazing at making, for instance, me and I think people around you understand what you're trying to say. And just, I guess, the tone of voice, your body language, just how, it's not just how sweet you are. It's just who she is. For me, it's a lot of tone of voice, right? And I found myself saying, which to me sounds like, babe, I've said it in the nicest way. And she's like, yeah, but you sounded mean. I'm like, what? What are you saying? How could I be mean? I'm mean right now. Yeah, dude, I'm like frustrated. But then I was like, oh man, she's right. So yeah, I don't know. You're really good at explaining this.
I will say though, I mean, romantic relationships, you're with that person. If you're married, you're with that person for the rest of your life, right? They say like you're choosing who you're going to fight with for the rest of your life. That's what you're choosing when you marry somebody. And I think that that's so interesting because there are some relationships that are toxic that you can tell yourself, you know what, I need this person less in my life. I don't need to have them around as much. So you set time boundaries, right? You're like, you know what? Hey, we can, I'm busy today, so you actually can't come over right now. But you can come over next week, Thursday around 5. How does that sound?
Right.
You know? So that's a way when you actually
give alternatives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kind of like they say, not to refer to everybody as children, but you know, they say to a child, it's better to give them options and say, do you want the red coat or the blue coat? So that they actually feel like they have some freedom in choosing. And they're like, the blue coat. And you end up feeling a little bit less pushed to make this decision that is, you know, that you don't understand.
And the parent gets to say, oh great, they didn't wear the orange coat.
Exactly.
But you know, for me it makes so much sense because my daughter wants to wear, you know, flip-flops, and instead of saying you can't wear flip-flops, I give her 2 pairs of shoes she gets to choose from, right? So I enforced a boundary because I knew we're going hiking. We can't wear flip-flops, but I gave her the choice. So when you do boundaries with people, it's like, hey, listen, we can talk about this either tomorrow or on Thursday. What works for you? Because right now it doesn't work. And then they have the ability to kind of, oh, okay, well, I have a choice in the matter. So I think that's great. I think tone of voice is awesome. Body language, how you approach people, the kind of words coming out of your mouth. You know,
that's huge.
That is a big.
You know, I think I thought of something, a scenario that we just experienced the other day. Maybe we were planning something for Sunday worship and something, and I usually pick out songs and kind of organize the thing, and she comes in, okay, and then we end up collaborating later on, and I'll ask her, hey, what do you want to like chime in? And kind of naturally before, like a while ago, because we met as worship leaders, she would like, I would ask her, hey, do you want to get involved in this and this? And now, obviously, in the way the relationship is, we've also talked about like, hey, please feel like you can always talk to me. You can say anything. You can chime in, take ownership and all this stuff. Because I wanted her to feel freedom in being in my space. Because I'm allowing it. And that's also something that she taught me. But there was a moment where she just jumped in. Okay, I think we should do this, and this. And for a moment, I don't know why or what happened, but I was like, "Yo, hold on. We're supposed to be collaborating." What I was really feeling is like, "Yo, I'm in charge."
Right.
You know what I mean? So then after that, after I cooled down, yeah, exactly. But after I cooled down, I realized, because it's happened less than before, right? Yeah. But now what the dynamic has shifted into, hey babe, after I cooled down, I should say, after we both kind of came back and recalibrated, it was like, okay, from now on, let's work in a collaborative mood. Like, I know, like, you are super fully capable. I don't ever want you to feel like diminished or anything, that I'm the only one who can do this. You're fully capable of doing that. Now I know I'm fully capable of doing that, and I know you know that too. It's like, let's work in congruency. And I'm sorry I spoke to you like that, because I know that was just me, my ego. What I would love to do is, hey, I'll ask you what you think of this, and if you don't like it, you are free to say it. So now the dynamic is, hey babe, what do you think of this? It's okay if she says no. I mean, because she's not saying no because I'm a weirdo or because I suck. She's just saying no because what if we do this, you know? And it's now it's a collaborative environment.
Well, that's how it will feel when somebody sets a boundary with you.
Right.
You'll feel your ego got hurt.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
What you just said is that people will get hurt and oftentimes mad when you set a boundary. So that's why, you know, there are ways that you can make it easier, but at the end of the day, again, you can't control how another person reacts to you setting a boundary. You can only control what you say and how you say it. And so be sure to be kind and be sure to be understanding. and try to put yourself in the other person's shoes that it's hard to receive
Yeah, right.
this
Mhm.
boundary. So just be patient with them and know that eventually it will be
Yeah.
great, and the person will respect you more actually for setting up that boundary, which
Right.
is what happened with us.
Right.
Yeah.
I think of also the fact that so many times when there's a power differential between two people,
Mhm.
the one who feels as though they're a little bit more inferior in
Yeah.
some
Right.
way or in a lower level of some
Right.
kind, it hurts a little bit more,
Yeah.
Right.
as opposed to between two equals.
Mm.
And so I think recognizing, are you the person that's in charge? You've got to be even more sensitive
Yeah, right.
in your establishment of enforcing the boundary,
Mhm.
unless it's an issue of safety and grave concern. Hey, we got to make sure this is right, and
Mhm.
you have to be stern and whatnot. But so I think that's one thing that I love, just what I'm hearing from you, and you two are, hey, you're married now, you're both worship leaders,
Yeah.
you're doing a project together, and it's like, whoa, we're equals here. There's
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
power differential amongst us. Like, let's collaborate here together in
Yeah.
a way of love and compassion. But you also brought up the fact that, hey, sometimes we use boundaries to push people out.
Right.
How do you ensure that you're setting a healthy boundary as opposed to a boundary that's just like, because we're actually selfish,
Mm.
and so we're not even letting people into our life?
Yeah. Ooh, for me, I've really had to check myself. I think in that scale, we're human, right? And there might be times where we just don't want to hang out with a friend, for instance, right? And I've learned with Laia, obviously learning how to be more vocal about things, just to kind of say things in a way that, if I was them, how would I want to be spoken to, right? Going with that, love one another like you would love yourself.
I guess I think of the example when
Mm.
some young parents had a bad experience with their parents, and it's like,
Yeah.
we're going to use the kids as bargaining chips here.
Yeah.
Okay. If you guys don't come visit us on our terms exactly the way we want, you don't see the kids.
Mm.
And I've heard this over and over
Wow.
again, between young parents who feel as though for one reason or another, the parent did something to them. And so it's like, nope, not going to happen this time again. And they just push this to the limit in a way that's
Yeah.
unhealthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes some parents can be unhealthy, and I understand. But then there's other times where it's like, why are you being vindictive?
Yeah.
That's the word that comes out, where we're revengeful.
Yeah.
And so we keep people out just because we're so hurt, and
Yeah.
there's that much bitterness.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oof.
I would love to hear you talk about the first time. We've talked about this before. The first time in the Bible that we see boundaries happening.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, we got to know, like, I don't know, can you look up the definition of boundaries?
Sure.
But while we do that, though, we got in the beginning, in the Garden of Eden was the first, like, awesome example of boundaries, right? I don't know if you guys have heard this before.
Like the idea of the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Exactly. And
Right.
that was more to protect him, right? So many people ask, why did he put, if he loves us so much, why would he God put the tree
in the
of
garden?
knowledge of
Yeah,
good and
yeah.
evil? Like, why would he do that? Okay, so the definition of boundary, a line that marks the limits of an area. A dividing line. See, even that, the way the dictionary defines it is, it seems like it's more of something that you can't do and less of something that you can do. But I kind of want to challenge that. It's less about what you cannot do and more about what you can do. See, in the Garden of Eden, when God said, eat of all of the things, it says first, right? Eat of everything. Go,
Yeah.
be free,
Yeah,
hang
there's
out,
freedom.
have fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Just don't eat of that one. So right there, we've already established is more about doing things and less about what you cannot do, right? Now, why did he do that? It was because I'm doing that because of love. I want you to be able to choose not to eat from that tree because I want you to choose to follow me, to love me, to be with me, right? Because if I don't give you that option, then it's forced.
Yeah.
That's forced right there. So I want to put that there, like knowing that I'm trying to risk it, knowing that I will risk losing you if you do choose. But I want you to know that I love you so much that you're able to choose to not follow me or
That's
to
good.
not be with me.
That's
When you
good.
think about relationships, I guess, like, what would be healthy boundaries that someone who's listening here right now and is wondering, okay, I'm potentially about to get into a relationship, or I'm in a relationship. What are some boundaries you think that would be helpful? Not necessarily the sexual nature only, but what are a few areas that you think, hey, this is a good boundary to have in your relationship?
It's a good question.
It is. What do you think? Dave?
Well, the first one I think that comes to mind is the time boundary that especially in our relationship has been a huge one, because I genuinely don't need a lot of time by myself. I function better even when people are around me. So that's just, for me, I can kind of recharge in an hour. And for Joe, he really enjoys his alone time. Not only does he need it, but he really enjoys it.
Yeah.
And so as his partner, I have to respect that. And I think it goes back to just feeling secure in myself and not assuming that I'm being rejected by anything that you do to keep our relationship in a healthy way, the way that it is.
And on my end, sorry to jump in, on my end, I have to also be respectful. I want to change that into conscious, that you actually enjoy not being alone, right? Yeah. And so I can actually do something about it.
What are some other ones? Like, how would you recommend mental boundaries or emotional for
so somebody getting into a relationship? Man, I think it's very important to learning to be by yourself, right? Learning who you are beforehand, right? And for instance, if we talk about time, what are your priorities? What are your hobbies? What are the things that you love to do? Don't necessarily neglect those things, because those are you. You love yourself. You invest in the things that you love. So if you love yourself, keep investing in those things, right? Healthily. That's good. And now in a relationship, if you're getting in a relationship, that's another aspect of your life that you can invest in, that you're choosing to invest in, which you should, healthily.
Yeah, I love that. I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think it, depends on the person too. Everybody will have different level of boundaries, different types of boundaries that are more of a priority. But again, back to when you're in a relationship, it's you and that person. So you're really choosing the person's flaws, right? You're choosing who you're going to fight with. You're choosing that person's flaws. And I think that expecting perfection out of someone is never good. And the Bible talks about that.
Yeah.
And when you look at 1 Corinthians 13, love is kind, love is patient. It is not boastful. It does not expect things of other people. I mean, it says it all right there. And so I think it ties all together, right? We know that there is freedom in love, and boundaries simply mean that there is freedom.
Right.
That's all that. That's all that boundaries mean. If there weren't boundaries, then it would be a forceful thing. There wouldn't be a choice. So if you're loving the other person, you have to allow that person to fail and that person to be who they are, and not expect so much out of the other person. And I wanted to say something because I was reading the other day, wives, submit to your husbands, and husbands, love your wife like Christ loves the church and would sacrifice himself for the church.
5.
And for the first time, I realized that expectations were the opposite of sacrifice. And really, that's what both of those Bible verses say.
Expectations are the opposite of sacrifice. Okay.
When you don't have these expectations, false expectations about the other person, you are just willing to put yourself and see the other person, as flawed and as they are, and you're willing to sacrifice yourself for the other person. Those Bible verses don't say, wives, submit to your husband if he is a good guy, perfect, and all this stuff. No. Submit to your husband, period, right? Sacrifice first, then everything else. And husbands, same thing. Sacrifice first.
Well, yeah, and the beautiful thing about that, I'm sorry to cut you off over there, but love, you've already given the definition of love. Love your wives like God loves the church.
Yeah.
Expectation, it kind of it determines what can you do for me.
Yeah.
Sacrifice is what can I do for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it's being in the service of others right there. Because obviously, when I'm expecting something from you, it's what can you do for me?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, when I travel, I try and travel with no expectations.
Right.
Mm.
But what you're saying is that when I'm entering into a relationship, you have to do the same thing,
Mhm.
because any expectation sets you up for disappointment and failure. And I mean, Zach and I were at a retreat on the weekend, and some guy was talking about this idea, and just in relationships, the idea of come into a relationship looking for how you can do something for them and not what you can get out of it, which is super important.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're running short on time. I do have another question to ask that I think is really important in this conversation, because what I want to know what you guys think what people should do if they have stepped over boundaries and want to come back.
Yeah.
Like how do you press reset?
Yeah.
First of all, I am tired of couples going out there and talking about like they have the answer to every question in the world.
Right.
Listen, me and Joe just got married a little bit more than a month ago. Okay. We don't have all the answers to marriage. We don't have all the answers to relationships. And we're not perfect. And we messed up too before marriage with many kinds of boundaries, you know, not respecting each other, you know, even in conflict. We had a really hard time getting to the place where we were able to have healthy conflict, right?
Yeah.
So,
mostly because of me. I'm not gonna lie.
I will say that the kinds of questions that keep me up at night is the sexual purity questions of this idea of staying a virgin until marriage. But what is a virgin? Because we have many definitions about what it is, right?
Sure.
And so we're really just lying to ourselves because while we're keeping these boundaries really close to sex, we're actually just lying to ourselves that this is okay and this is okay, and it's detrimental to us. And so for me, I think the conversation that I've had with my friends recently, actually, that has completely changed my perspective is it's not about how far you went. That's not the conversation. You need to talk with God and talk about forgiveness for yourself, first of all, because we can go back to when you were 12 years old and something happened that changed the way that you saw sexuality for the rest of your life. So that's a conversation you need to have with God. The boundaries questions, the how far can we go, all of that, that's the last thing you need to worry about. There were a lot of unresolved questions that I had since I was really young that I never asked, and that I never felt the courage to ask someone. And also no one really answered. Okay. So just to directly answer that question, it's not about when you start to feel bad. That's not the answer, because I can tell you right now that will always change and you will always convince yourself, right? Otherwise,
you'll try to justify it one way or another.
It's about, does that person respect you, and do you respect that person? Because honestly, sex is a conversation that now in marriage where we actually get to enjoy it, and I'm just like, wow, I'm so glad that we're doing this in marriage, you know, because, and now I see it. So just take it from me, like an advice, because the truth is you don't know until you know. So just take it from me that it's just the better thing to do.
And it's looking for ways to respect your significant other.
It's about respect.
I mean, for me, a little bit, just to make it short, it's in the sense of getting to know yourself. It's also kind of piggybacking what Laia said. It's learning to forgive yourself. Really forgive yourself. How you forgive somebody else, you have to learn to forgive yourself. Like really. And we tend to dwell on things that we've done, and we have to, like I have to put myself in timeout from God or from relationships or from everybody because I'm such a horrible person. But reality is, who am I to put myself in timeout from God? Right? He says, I already forgave you. That's it. And the awesome thing is that he knows our heart. So we don't have to dwell in that space. And that's, for instance, why David was known as the man after God's own heart. after doing all those crazy things, right?
I think of like the idea of pressing reset. If
Yeah.
you break a relational or one of the emotional or time boundaries, I think it's you can figure that out as a couple. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, there's forgiveness there,
Yeah.
and then so the same thing should apply to the physical and sexual boundaries.
Yeah.
However, obviously there's some level of chemical things that happen there. So there's that, but then you get the forgiveness from God, and God has God is willing and able and wants to give us a new heart and step in that way as well.
Yeah.
Always.
So it's looking for that forgiveness from your partner and forgiveness from God.
Yeah.
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 And there are toxic relationships, right? Where people can say, yeah, we crossed this boundary, but it's okay. Next time, we'll be more careful. And then suddenly next time is you just keep pushing the boundary, right? You need to also know when you're dating, this isn't when you're married. When you're dating, if you're in a situation where the person is not respecting your boundary and yeah, you mess up, but that person is making no effort to respect your boundary, then that is a conversation that you need to have with yourself, because whatever happens in dating, like you carry that into marriage.
And it will get magnified.
It will.
Yeah.
It will.
I think people need to be ready to walk away when someone continues to abuse boundaries in a relationship. It's one thing if you're both really trying, but if someone is, as you were saying, just they have no repentant spirit, that is going to be detrimental in a marriage. And you need to pay attention to that. This book that I read so long ago, it comes back to me as just such a great book. Some people might think it's incredibly limiting and very conservative, but I love it. It's called Choosing God's Best: Wisdom for Lifelong Romance by Dr. Don Ronicar. And he kind of outlines literal specifics for couples in every aspect of their relationship.
That's cool.
That's where kind of the constraint comes that people are like, I don't know if I can do that. But he talks about this idea that, hey, there should be boundaries along the way. And until you increase your level of commitment, you have to hold higher and stronger boundaries for certain things. So for instance, he would not advocate for people to get romantically involved without having increased their emotional and spiritual involvement together, right?
Wow, that's interesting.
So once you increase your commitment level, you can then kind of quote unquote increase your physical levels together. So, okay, the boundary can be pushed a little bit further out, because the whole idea is it's not how far can I push things, but it's like how holy can we be in a way in which we're building something for a lifetime, not for a moment. But that's the shallowness of our age right now. It's about momentary satisfaction for this season, this moment right now. This is what's going to make me feel good. So Don Ronicar, he really points to the fact that there is a process in which you can build for something better, but it all has to be within sequence, in the right sequence. So this conversation about boundaries, man, it's big. And so guys, thank you so much for talking through this with us. This was helpful.
Have you got maybe one question each that you would leave with our listeners that they should be thinking about this week, maybe as it relates to the topics we've talked about? And while you're thinking about that, just a reminder for the listeners, those 5 areas or 6 areas is time and, now I'm going to forget them, time, emotional, mental, physical, sexual, and then the one I'm missing, material. Yeah. So jot those down in a notepad and think about how you can make boundaries. But you guys got any questions we should be thinking about?
Ooh, something I like to think about sometimes every now and then is right now where I am, what bit of advice would I give myself 5-10 years from now? For instance, in this case, in a relationship, what would I tell myself in my first relationship? And what would I want to tell myself or ask myself even in, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years down the road?
That's good.
In a different mindset that you're in.
Yeah. I would say truly the first thing that comes to my mind is, what is it that I need to heal from? And just know that if you're starting to date or you're dating, you can get to know someone, you can grow intimacy with them, you can grow closeness with them without having to overstep any boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what I would tell myself if I was when I started dating. But what is it that you need to heal from? Because honestly, there may be a lot that you may be unaware of, and that's impacting your interpersonal relationships and will come out eventually in a relationship and in marriage.
Yeah, and don't get into a relationship wanting to get to know somebody. Do that in the friendship. Start to date them because you know them.
Yes.
That's good. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks, Joe and Laia. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you guys.
Loved it.
As we're coming up to Thanksgiving, everyone set your time boundaries, set your emotional boundaries, set your mental boundaries. Whatever conversations are coming up there.
Yeah.
But again, thanks so much for listening in on our conversation. We'd love to hear your thoughts as always. You can message us on Instagram at choosetoverflow. Visit our website, choosetoverflow.com, where you can find all our past episodes, and we've got a downloadable summary and a reflection guide for today's episode as well, to help the ideas stick and help you share what you've learned with others.
That's
awesome. choosetoverflow.com. Check it out.
Yes.
And thanks as always to our audio engineer, Zach Cast, and the Loma Linda University Church for their support of this podcast.
Well, friends, we want to leave you as we always do with a prayer. So bless all of you through this power of the Holy Spirit. Bless all of you through the power of Jesus. And bless all of you through the power of the Father who sent the Son that gives us the Spirit. And I pray that you would be truly filled to overflow.
Yeah.
Amen. So friends, as we always say, today, choose to overflow.